WLPs were that the women were negotiating for themselves, as principals, not as agents. At first, I used the frameworks from the shadow negotiation in these programs that I ran in corporations and in non-governmental organizations in the United States and abroad. Over time, as I listened to the stories of these participants, I began to see new facets of negotiation that I hadn't noticed before. I started to appreciate nuances in how these women, and some men, handled tricky situations in their organizations. Over time, I began to capture their stories. These stories became the data for this book. Several examples are especially salient for understanding the trajectory of this book and how it differs from the previous ones. Leading Women Executives, a Chicago-based program for senior-level women from different companies who attend a multi-session program, has been an important site of learning for me. As academic advisor as well as an instructor, I develop a strong working relationship with the participants. That relationship gives us multiple occasions to discuss their negotiation experiences. At the conclusion of one of the programs, a graduate saying goodbye to me whispered in my ear that I had changed her life. Wow, I thought, what is that story? It is a fascinating one, and it appears in this book. That led me to become more deliberate about capturing the stories about how these women and others use the negotiation module to get something they previously thought was not achievable. The second incident occurred in another program, where we taped women negotiating their own everyday negotiation, and we did the role play twice. The first time was after the negotiation module. The second time was after colleagues Robin Eli and Carol Levy did a session on leading with purpose. 2 insights came from that experience. First, that one has to create occasions to negotiate at work. They are not always obvious. And second, that focusing on the link between what is good for you and for your organization seems to work better at engaging the other party. We discovered this in the videos of the role play, as well as in the results the women reported. This experience led me to consider the various ways that people situate their negotiations in the context of ongoing relationships. It also helped me see that those who can connect their interests to their organizations are empowered to advocate more forcefully for what they want. A third experience comes from a story that a very senior leader told in one of the programs. She wanted to negotiate a complicated office arrangement with her CEO. They had a good working relationship, but she expected this to be a difficult negotiation. In her story, she described how she let him know of her accomplishments to remind him of her value. But she also let him know of the other choices she had, in a way that was appreciative and non-confrontational. Although we'd written about making one's value visible in everyday negotiation, this story made me look deeper into the ways that experienced executives do so. Where we had talked about raising the costs of the status quo in the earlier book, I was never confident about how one could do that and not raise the other party's ire. I had dropped it from my teaching. But from this story, I could see how a seasoned executive could do this smoothly, and that led me to collect other stories that led to developing the ideas about an iron fist and a velvet glove. A fourth experience led me to consider the limits of some of the strategies in the earlier books. This was particularly true in the context of moves and turns. The idea behind moves is that other negotiators can say things that can make you feel defensive. Turns are actions that enable you to respond. Moves and turns is something that people associate with the earlier books. I've written more about them, and the papers and chapter have been reproduced in a number of publications. We consider moves and turns in Chapter 6 in this book. However, in my experiences, especially in Africa and Asia, but also Europe, I came to see the limits of some of the turns one might recommend. I remember vividly being called out by a dean at a university in East Africa who said to me, I could never use that turn. So in this book, we are both more detailed in describing moves and turns, and more circumspect in what we recommend. Negotiating at work is informed in another way from my teaching with executives. Over the past decade, and even before that, I've been involved in 2 different types.